Welcome to the GSMC Pets Podcast, the show that caters to pet lovers of all kinds. We'll talk about pets on social media, pets doing amazing things, and how to take care of the pets in your life. Whether your pet is a dog, a cat, a llama, hamster, reptile, or something more exotic, you'll find educational and entertaining information on the GSMC Pets Podcast.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Pet Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex Fletes. It's always a pleasure to get to talk about my different legged friends, whether it's 4 and furry legged, maybe it's 8-legged, multi-legged, no-legged, winged, or any other type of legged pets and animals you can think of. And speaking of, well, no-legged pets, how about we talk about them snakes? So, just recently in my own hometown, I got the pleasure of experiencing an exotic animal festival, and let me just say it was quite the experience. So, when it comes to animals that would be considered untraditional, I gotta say, I do enjoy a good reptile. Reptiles are very interesting creatures, very misunderstood as well by humans, simply because for the longest time, we considered these animals to be absolutely dangerous, unloving, just the dangers. And to an extent, that is true. There are a lot of reptiles and, well, scaled animals that aren't exactly safest for a large amount of people. But at the same time, any animal could be considered that if provoked enough. But I really did want to take a moment to talk to you guys about some of these unique animals, especially more of the scaled variety. So without further ado, let's just kind of get into that. I want to talk mainly about a lot of different types of snakes I've seen today, or, well, recently, and just some of the very fascinating animals out there, pets or not, and really the topic of, are these exotic pets, are they good pets? Do they make a good pet for you? What kind of things should you know about them, and just some interesting facts. So, first thing I just want to talk about are, well, snakes, because snakes are probably some of the most infamous. You have your very simple snakes. There's obviously two classifications of snakes that you should know about before you even think about pets, reptiles, and this is definitely for the novices, but one important thing to know is that not every snake is going to bite you when you're not looking, because in fact some of those snakes don't even have teeth, because there are venomous snakes and there are constrictor snakes. I'd hope that would be something you've learned in early biology classes, and very, very, very simple knowledge, and it'll also help you prepare for what type of animal you could be spending a lot of time with. When it comes to constricting snakes, they do tend to be more of the bigger snakes, simply because if you've ever seen in nature, a lot of the big snakes, anacondas, boa constrictors, they have to be at least somewhat comparable to its prey so they can constrict said prey. It's going to get a little morbid here for a moment, but it's important to know these kind of things as well, because education is my game here. I'm trying to make sure that you all, as viewers, anyone who's interested in pets, know a little bit more about, proper care of animals. And let me just say, being at this exotic animal festival was really something else. There are so many unique colors and shapes of reptiles I never thought I'd actually get to see. It was really, really something else. Even plants. There were plenty of unique plants there. So I've gotten to see several different, boas, constrictors, anacondas. You get to see a lot of these unique animals at events like this. And sometimes while I'm there, I wonder, are these good environments for these animals? Are these animals going to be okay in these containers. I mean, I see like some snakes, I see some frogs in like Tupperware glasses, but then as I've been explained to by a lot of these vendors or people who go to these places and take care of these animals, they have to be in very close places, in very close spaces, because these animals are known for escaping, and even the smallest opening can give them something to get out of. And that's really important to know, simply because you may think this is very inhumane. Actually, it's pretty normal for these kind of animals. I mean, for one thing, you've ever heard, you flip a rock, you'll find a snake under it. Snakes like closed spaces. Keeps them protected, keeps them, away from predators, keeps them away from the sun, and at the same time, it gives them a place to, rest and, stay protected, because they're not armored creatures. So if you ever go to one of these events and you consider, well, this is completely inhumane to see this lizard or this snake in a sealed off container, no, they're fine. They are absolutely fine. It's for your safety and for their safety. Back at this, I'm sorry. I'm just really excited. I took a lot of pictures at this event, and I got a big chance to really explore, to see a lot of animals. There were a lot of exotic animals, and some I would say, yes, these are perfectly capable, but there are a lot of animals that you as an individual need to be aware of, that you are treating them. You have to be very prepared for an animal like this, because being exotic isn't just a fancy word for saying, oh, they're different animals and it makes me look fancier. No, these are exotic animals because they aren't from these kind of places, and they require a lot of extra special care that some people aren't quite ready to adapt to. And that's just fine. If you live somewhere where there could be a lot of interesting animals, or if you've ever, as a child, gone and played in your backyard, you could have actually come across several of these animals. But some of these more very, very unique animals, for example, a scaleless, we have a, let's see, I'm sorry, there's just so many of them. There's pastel champagne boas. We have, albino boas. There's so many big snakes that I look at that these are not things you would see here in your backyard. Maybe if you go into your backyard, you might see a corn snake or something. Not a big deal. A little grass snake. Nothing to worry about. And maybe you've as a kid, gone and caught some lizards and stuff. It's no big deal. But there are some really unique ones here. A hypno constrictor. It looks like this because its pattern actually can hypnotize its prey, because it's very disorienting. Even to people, it can be disorienting if you stare long enough. And it's really fascinating to get to see these kind of animals. People don't quite get the chance to experience animals like this, and I would highly encourage, if there is a local exotic animal venue happening anywhere near you, to definitely go check it out. They're usually pretty cheap, or sometimes they're free. Especially go to your zoo and see if you can learn about exotic snakes. Because even if you're like, I am not a snake person, I do not want a snake in my house, you should still learn. Learning about animals will always be something super beneficial to anyone. A few good friends of mine are a big reptile enthusiast. They do house a lot of lizards and stuff, and I get to learn a lot from being with them. And I always appreciate the time I get to spend with them and learn about their animals, because every time I think I know something, they always show me something new. I'm like, whoa, I didn't know that was something that could happen, or I never knew about that. But nonetheless, it's absolutely important that people get some education and learn that not all snakes are bad, not all reptiles are bad, and not all exotic animals can make the best pets. Any pet requires a ton of support and commitment, but reptiles will probably require some of the most commitment you'll ever see when it comes to an animal. Some of these snakes were like, lengthwise, they were probably twice the length of me, but like weight and size, these things were, some of them were as thick and as like round as my arm. these things weren't wrapping around my arm. These things were as big as my arm because they require a lot of care and commitment to them. So if you are someone who enjoys reptiles, definitely go see one of these reptile exhibits because it might change your life. You may grow a bigger fear of snakes, or you may decide that you want nothing to do with snakes ever again in your life, and that is just fine too. There is nothing wrong with any of that, but do make sure that if you involve yourself with any kind of pets like this, that it is founded under knowledge over a simple fear and phobia or misinformation, because that's always what people are going to get wrong about animals, and it really can affect how these animals can survive. But with that being said, we are actually going to go on to our first break, and coming up, I'm going to go more in depth about some of these animals and some of the things you may see with an exotic pet. But until then, please enjoy these words from our sponsor.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
And welcome back. Hope it didn't keep you waiting too long. As we were previously discussing, we were talking about exotic animals and whether or not people can find them good pets. Are they good for you? Are they good for your household? That is the very important question today. So we're going to go more in depth into some of these animals and to some of the things you can actually expect with them. We were talking heavily about snakes, and I'd like to come back to them in a little bit, but I want to talk about some other animals that might be considered exotic. One thing that a lot of people don't realize actually can be pets are plants. In a sense, some plants actually can become a form of pet. And you may think, well, that's not a big deal. I have some plants in my backyard and this and that. But yes, there are plants that might be considered a sort of living creature or have sort of very specific needs. If you've ever actually messed with, say, a Venus flytrap or any type of semi-carnivorous plant, there actually are a good few of them. These are plants that will require a bit more of, let's just say, finesse when monitoring. And a lot of these tropical or exotic pet environments will actually sell these sort of plants. It just blows my mind thinking about it. I'm sure growing up or maybe in your own home, you may have some eucalyptus, some house plants, flowers, and those are always great. Nothing wrong with them. Plant away. Let's get some more oxygen flowing into the environment. Nothing wrong with that. I myself actually do grow cacti, and I enjoy my cacti. They're really great. They don't require much maintenance, but when it comes to things like, say, a Venus flytrap, they aren't a novelty. They actually do serve a pretty decent purpose, and if you, as an individual, are more than willing to spend some time into investing into a Venus flytrap, more power to you. They are definitely interesting, but they require some very interesting, I guess the word is care, because they actually do need to go and hibernate after a while too. If I recall correctly, you actually are supposed to freeze them at a time whenever the weather isn't consistent, because they can die very easily. I think when it comes to winter, I believe you actually are supposed to freeze them in, say, a freezer, let them actually like frost, and they will go into a cryonic state to where they won't, take any injury. And then later on, as it gets back to the summertime, you put them back out in the heat, they thaw out, and then they will go back to normal. It's very fascinating how some of these plants and animals can do that. There are actually frogs that do the exact same thing when it comes to the winter. I think they nicknamed it the zombie frog because it'll actually, when it gets cold, it'll actually just sit near a tree or somewhere and it will freeze over and it will just stay there, be frozen, and then eventually when the summer or spring hits, it defrosts and then it picks back up where it left off. It's really, really fascinating what animals are capable of. Now we're talking about plants, but what about the things under the plants? Yes, the creepy crawlies, the multi-legged, the 6, the 8, the no-legged animals and creatures that sort of dwell beneath the soil. So at this really, really amazing pet exotic animal expose, they had things like, giant desert millipedes, and millipedes are probably one of the few things I will say no go, sir, simply because they're just there's so much body but so much leg, and they are interesting creatures, but they are not for me. I can say that with certainty. Getting to be up close to one of these things, they are not, we aren't exactly on a copacetic level, which is absolutely fine. Not everyone is built to really work with some of these creatures. You have to have a real passion for them. A lot of people will say dogs, cats, birds, they're my passion, but it does require a special individual to take care of animals like that. Especially when it comes to things that might be a little more dangerous. If you've ever gotten the chance to really look at one, scorpions. Scorpions are actually pets, not very common pets. In fact, I think there are less common of pets than tarantulas or even poisonous or venomous snakes. Simply because they're just little battle bugs, I don't know how often I've seen people actually have a scorpion for a pet. I've seen people with much more dangerous pets, or pets that, let's just say, pets that probably garner more fear. I mean, a scorpion is basically like a bug. It is basically a bug. And actually, believe it or not, their sting isn't that much more dangerous than a bee sting. Now, if you're allergic to bees, yes, you'll have a problem. But most scorpions that can be sold to people, their stings are actually not that dangerous. That's a really good fact to know. Legally, there are stores, even stores like Petco or PetSmart, that can sell scorpions as pets. But they can't sell anything super dangerous. So, of course, if you go to a pet store, you're not going to get like a black mamba or a corn snake or a rattlesnake, because that's just completely irresponsible. But they can sell a scorpion that, its sting probably would sting and, be as dangerous as a bee sting. So that's something that is really good to know, that that's legally what's going on. But scorpions are actually, believe it or not, they're actually a lot more fragile than people give it credit for. And they're really not that bad of animals. In fact, they're pretty docile, unless provoked. So, it probably wouldn't sting you if you tried to hold it in your hand, but if you took it by surprise, tried to mess with it from behind, it'll probably start whipping its tail. But again, we are like 80 to 100 times the size of a scorpion, and its sting most scorpion stings wouldn't be that dangerous, the ones that we have, that we can buy legally. Of course, if you go out somewhere where there's known to be very dangerous animals, because there are dangerous animals everywhere, if you go to one of those areas, you obviously need to proceed with caution. So, do these kind of animals work as pets? I'm getting to the point where I'd say there really is nothing wrong with a lot of these pets. They really aren't dangerous creatures. They're just unconventional, honestly. snakes, reptiles, insects. These there's actually really nothing wrong with these. I mean, horned worms, they really are they're blue worms. They're not very dangerous. I mean, if you live where I live, or in most places, you'll actually see caterpillars that are like fiery and have a lot of spikes and spines. Those things are actually much more dangerous. And you know, those things fall everywhere. Let's just say when the spring hits, it gets windy, you leave your car parked under a tree, come back maybe an hour later and you just see caterpillars all over your car. Ugh, that automatically just gives me shivers up my spine when I think about it, because those little things, you can't pick them up, you can barely flick them away because they have so many spines on them, and you might get a pretty serious infection if you mess with one of those things. It'll feel like it's just burning going all up your hand or your arm if they touch you. Those things right there already are 10 times dangerous than a lot of these pets right here, and you get training how to handle these things. And it's really fascinating that it's actually the stuff in the wild that will be more dangerous than the stuff that we could find at one of these events. These things only appear dangerous to us simply because they're things we don't see very often. And these are actually really fascinating and even, in some cases, really calming creatures. They don't do that much. They're in captivity, and they don't have anything dangerous to them. It's just something we don't see very often. And that's always my motto, is to learn more, get more experience, and go out and see more animals. Who knows, you might go out to one of these places and discover there's an animal out there that really does pique your interest, and perhaps you want to learn more about it. That's sort of my goal, to pique your interest and to get you more insightful on animals. But as we quickly break, we're going to come back and talk more about some animals that I know might be a little less savory to have around your house, and what you can also do to really get to study these kind of animals more. But until then, enjoy these quick messages.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Lovers, I hope you enjoyed those messages. I know I sure did. Now, I've been meaning to get around to this for a little while. I've been bouncing around it, but I wanted to make sure you guys were paying attention so I could really get to this part here. And that is, what about those dangerous pets? The pets that maybe we don't want to let in our house, or, the pets that we were warned about. Perhaps the snakes that have the sharp fangs, the pointy heads. What about the lizards with the longer claws, the more predatorial creatures? What do we do about those? Are they pets? Do we allow them in our houses? Do we watch out for them? Do we just ignore them? Well, first off, a lot of those answers are going to be no. We don't ignore them because we don't ignore animals. We don't, we don't just kind of play things off as nope, never again. Don't. We want to learn, and that's an important thing to learn about. One good thing to note is that as you get older, that's when a lot of times these animals will open up. Your world might be opened up. Now, I'm not saying you can actually go out and purchase one of the world's most deadliest snakes. First off, it'll be extremely expensive, and there will be a lot of paperwork you have to fill out if you go about the traditional way. And not even just poisonous reptiles or venomous reptiles. Let's get that straight right away. Poison is something that has to be ingested or through contact. So poisonous gas, maybe poisonous liquid that you have to drink, or has to be through contact. That's poison. Venom is something that has to be injected, and all snakes are going to be venomous. I don't know if there is a poisonous snake out there who releases a poisonous gas or has like body liquid that it secretes that makes it poisonous. There are frogs that do that, but that's a different story. But know that difference too, because that might one day win you some money on Jeopardy or something. I don't know. But knowing those differences, snakes that are venomous, I don't know how regularly we are able to purchase them. But a lot of times, snakes like that are going to be smaller, so you're not going to see like a 12-foot venomous snake. That would be a nightmare, and despite what movies or TV might have you think, usually they don't do that. If a snake is bigger, it usually it's very, very frightening when you see it. But let's just say a big 12-foot boa constrictor, it's not going to really have the sharpest of teeth. In fact, it's probably going to have very little teeth. What it does is, once it squeezes the life out of its prey, it will actually unhinge its jaw. So it'll take its jaw and then unlatch it and then open it up and just swallow everything. It's really impressive, but also it doesn't pose very much of a threat to you. That's why a lot of times they can sell constrictors. But then when it comes to venomous snakes, a lot of times they're going to be more intimidating in looks. So when you have something that is intimidating, typically that's because it is intimidating, or it needs to be able to adapt in some weird way. So if you see a snake, not through your own personal bias, but if you see a snake and it has usually a sharper head, not a flat nose, but a pointy nose, or maybe it's a lot smaller, but it looks very aggressive, there's a pretty good chance that snake is probably going to be venomous. So that's automatically something important to know. Now, the chances of you actually being able to go out and purchase a venomous snake are very slim, even at an exotic pet establishment. If you meet somebody who's selling venomous snakes or reptiles, then you might need to be cautious of that, because that may not be a legit operation. There are actually a lot of procedures to keep people from getting these animals so frequently because of how dangerous they can be, and especially because they have very strict and very precise diets and care needs. So when it comes down to those things, you really don't have to worry too much about snakes like that. So if you ever meet someone who has a snake, 9 out of 10 times that snake's going to be relatively harmless. Unless you are a field mouse and they drop you in its cage, you're going to be pretty much harmless. But they are a very fascinating bunch of creatures. Them and a lot of reptiles, lizards, geckos. Very rarely are there very dangerous lizards. Very, very rarely. There aren't a lot of them that you'll see. A lot of them are just little lazy lizards, and they're pretty cool to look at. They're very harmless. Bug eaters. That's primarily what they eat, bugs. And then spiders. We'll get to spiders a little bit later, because I'm sure not everyone's ready for that topic. I'm trying to ease you into it. But honestly, these animals are fascinating. They're unique. They have so much to offer when it comes to versatility, when it comes to just knowledge. And of course, there's nothing wrong with your traditional pets, your cats, your dogs, bunny rabbits, birds, all that stuff. But these are a very niche set of creatures that a lot of people tend to overlook just for the fact that they are intimidating or they have a reputation. But, a lot of people, a lot of places, a lot of things have reputations, but it doesn't always equate one to another, or simply through misinformation. And my goal is to simply inform you all that there are nothing wrong with these creatures. One day I'm going to get more in depth about this. I might actually have to get more information from my friends about the reptiles and a lot of things they do, because there's a lot of fascinating things that I've found reptiles to do. Diving into my some personal stories for myself, a little bit of history behind me is that I actually used to work at my local zoo a few years ago, back in high school. When I say a few, I mean like after 5 years ago. And when I worked there, I was a volunteer. And when you go into training, it's a requirement that you have to learn how to handle specific animals. So very small animals, in case you ever get put on an area where you have to demonstrate animals. So, it's very simple. Oh, hey, I need to hold a turtle. Cool. You need to learn how to hold a hedgehog. Awesome. You need to learn how to hold a snake. What? And it's not normal either, because you also learn very quickly that snakes love to explore, and they can get out of just about anything if even a small enough space is given. This is not dangerous at all. This is what a lot of zoos will do to protect their snakes, is that a lot of times how you have to learn how to hold a snake is you have to learn how to you put them in a small pillowcase that fits their size, very rooming, and yes, they can breathe in there. And then you have to tie the top of the pillowcase in a knot, not a super tight knot, but a knot they can't get out of. And then you put said pillowcase in a cooler. The cooler is to help keep the temperature so that way it doesn't get too hot for the snakes or too cold. And then afterwards, they don't really tell you this, but they will tell you, okay, open up the cooler. Now unwrap the pillowcase. And then right before you stick your hand in, they tell you, also, there's a snake in there. You have to be able to get in there, find the snake, hold it out, show everyone, and then put it back in. I was not prepared for this, and needless to say, although I managed to pass, I definitely freaked out because, you just don't expect the unexpected. But regardless, it was a really good experience, and it did teach me how to understand the complexities of these type of animals. Their needs, their wants, and it really is great to get to go to a nature institute and learn about them. I find snakes and reptiles very fascinating. Would I ever own my own snake? Probably not. Just simply because it's not something I personally would, want to have all the time. It's not the kind of animal I want to have to keep care of. But I do appreciate and respect the majesty and the complexity of animals like these. The color patterns, what they do, and I'll explain more about this in the next segment, but we're actually about to go on another quick break. Don't worry, it won't be too long this time, and I'm going to explain just some of the fun and amazing things that these snakes can do, and why maybe you should consider, maybe taking a second look at them. They really are fascinating. They are unique creatures, and they really aren't that dangerous. They're actually just funny little noodles. But until then, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the cool of the snake. Stay tuned.
Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then, the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
no need to worry or fret, fellow pet lovers, because we are back once again. I hope you guys are ready to hear some really cool facts about snakes. So, as we know, snakes are long, scaly noodles that wrap around, bite, and creep the ever-living bejeebus out of most people. Which is not a bad thing either, because how else are they going to preserve themselves? Having a bit of intimidation is actually a really, really valuable skill. But it is actually very common. The fear of snakes, or herpetophobia. It's actually one of the most common phobias, with about 1/3 of adult humans being afraid of it. It's very interesting that it's a relatively commonly shared fear, but at the same time, it's just, being, honestly creeped out by them. It's completely understandable that most people would be, because not a lot of people get exposure to these animals. Along with that, did you know that actually there are animals that are immune to snake venom? It's like most people know the mongoose is, which is completely fascinating, having the ability to just not be, affected by the bite of a snake. Their dangerous, venom doesn't affect them whatsoever. It's pretty interesting, actually. Let's see. And it's actually known that the heaviest snake in the world is the anaconda. It can weigh over 595 pounds, nearly 600 pounds. Whoa. Oh, well, that also makes sense, because the anaconda, lives in places where they can eat much bigger prey, like capybara, jaguars. Jeez. That's a terrifying, fact right there. But it's pretty cool to think that, there's more to these creatures than we realize, but we aren't really shown the fact that, these creatures are actually really, really impressive too. Let's see. I'm looking at some interesting facts about these creatures as well. This one's a little bit of a morbid fact, but I'm going to say it anyway. Apparently, if a snake is decapitated, the head, it can still bite even hours after death. And these bites will actually contain a large amount of venom too. So it's kind of like a final, if I'm going down, you're coming with me sort of thing. But that's fairly terrifying. But these creatures, they've been surviving for a long time. So clearly, they're doing something right to keep living. But it's really interesting. Now, all this doesn't entirely affect the fact of whether or not these things can be decent pets or not. I mean, we still also have to consider things about, other semi-dangerous animals. I mean, for a long time, before we really domesticated them, dogs were, more wolf-like, more feral, and to this day, there are still feral dogs, but they're still a very domesticated creature to this day. It all does eventually come down to, does this creature, how well is it trained, and what's it being trained for? And, I mean, there's also a big, worry about, is this creature being treated well in its domestication? Because with creatures that are not completely domesticated, it can really be a toss-up, because animals still are animals and have their animalistic instincts. There are some animals that can be domesticated, but there are also a lot of animals that aren't supposed to be domesticated, or haven't been domesticated enough to say safely that this is an animal that can survive this way. There are even some turtles, several amounts of turtles that can't be domesticated. And turtles are some of the most docile creatures, but it's not simply that they're dangerous, it's that they wouldn't make it in a domesticated household, which is unfortunate, but it's a fact. I mean, snakes are definitely fairly interesting creatures. They're also one of the most impressive things about snakes are the patterns. No two snakes are going to have the exact same pattern, but it is like faces. A good example of this, if you ever just see a picture of it, if they have like a face on the back of them or on any part of their body, it makes them look more intimidating, or that they can see behind them. So if a lesser intelligent creature like a predator tries to come up for them, it'll look like they're looking at them in the face and be more cautious, even though that cobra could be completely oblivious. And that's like one of the coolest things I've heard. Along with that, there are other snakes that have patterns, or that use their patterns in very unique ways that actually help it to blend in, or even to disorient their opponents. Going back to the cobra for a second, with the cobra, if you've ever go and look in fiction, go watch Aladdin if you want, and you'll see when Jafar turns into a cobra, he's got big freaky patterns, those snake patterns, the faces, the colors, they help to disorient opponents and to really get them confused. Can't tell where the head is, can't tell where the body starts. It can befuddle an opponent just long enough for them to initiate a strike or do something. One picture I managed to get is called a hypno cobra, and looking at it, it's not even in motion, but it's got this interesting pattern. It's kind of almost like a checker pattern, and if you put this cobra in more like a hay field or a wheat field or something on the ground, and you see it moving, this pattern, even looking at it from a still position, you can see how disorienting a creature like this would be. Whereas you have other creatures again, pythons or constrictors or boas, where they have more blotchy patterns. And that's probably because these creatures would be more in the mud or in the dirt. So having these blotchy patterns, it makes them more able to blend into the dirt, or in the mud or anything like that, or even the trees too. You may not see. If you definitely wouldn't see one of these if they were slinking around in the mud, you wouldn't see them that easily. But in the trees as well, sometimes they might blend in with the roots or stuff, and it's really fascinating when you look at it. But then you look at an albino or a really fastly colored snake, and it's whoa, that thing would not do well. But it usually has size on its side to really help with that. It's so fascinating to notice if you really take the time to just look at one. It's really interesting, but people don't give these guys enough of a chance. They're creepy, they're cool, they're a little bit slimy, but they are not bad creatures. But I find snakes to be very fascinating, along with lizards, which I definitely want to get to talking about in a little while. But these are some of the most fascinating creatures on the planet. You'd think that a creature that has no arms would be a little more helpless, but nope. They are definitely pretty high tier on the food chain. And I'm not one to talk about tier lists, but I put them at a high B, at least in intimidation and survivability. But this ain't Smash Bros, and I ain't a tier maker. But what I will say about these things is that, man, do these things have some style to them as well. The patterns can be pretty bland and blotchy, but when they have style, man, they have some style. I recommend going to look up some stylistic snakes. Like I said, I love looking at cobras. They have such a unique and pretty fascinating design, and it's just really cool. Let's see, any more interesting facts? Let's see. Wow. There are pretty interesting stuff. It says here, apparently, a person is 9 times more likely to die from being struck by lightning than to die from a venomous snake bite. So there's something you don't need to worry about. It says fewer than 1 in 37,500 people are bitten by venomous snakes a year. And only 1 in 50 billion people will actually die. So I'd say you don't have much to worry about with these things unless you're going out and finding something to worry about. So there is a lot of misconception that I definitely think some people should take some time to put into consideration, put a little things into perspective. But we're about to go on break, and when we come back, we want to talk a little bit more about some other scaly friends and some other exotic pets that maybe aren't as intimidating. And I'll also talk about some of my favorite pets that I've seen from this event and things that I think you should look into as well. But until then, please enjoy these messages.
the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Sliding back into the topic today, we're still talking about some creepy reptiles and some not so creepy facts about them, along with some other exotic animals today. And I just want to say thank you for joining me today. Man, do I love talking about some interesting animals and their facts. So we've talked plenty about snakes and their a lot of fun facts about snakes. How are they dangerous? Are they suited for the home? The answer is yes, snakes are fine for home. You're not going to find a lot of exceptionally dangerous snakes in your area. And very, very rarely is it that a snake will, actually, it's very rare for someone to actually die from a snake bite nowadays. It doesn't happen that often. And I mean, unless you go provoking a snake, I don't think you should be having any problems. But with that being said, I felt like it's time to talk about a few other animals real quick before we get too late into this podcast. And I definitely want to say spiders and geckos and lizards and bugs. So am I. There's so many different types of pets at these exotic things. I can't even begin to talk about them all today. But I will say there were a lot of really fascinating things I've noticed, a lot of really unique species you just wouldn't get to see anywhere else. And I just want to kind of, go over a few of them real quick. Things such as, let's talk about turtles. I think everyone likes turtles. Turtles, tortoises, there is a big difference between them. One thing you should know that turtles are more aquatic based than tortoises are. Tortoises are more land creatures. And they typically can get very large and will usually be the larger and live the longest. But they are fascinating creatures. And there are a lot of different varieties as well, colors and shapes of turtles. They're honestly adorable, but they're also not something to expect a lot out of, which is why turtles are simple pets, but they require time, obviously, because turtles and time just kind of go hand in hand. Frogs are definitely interesting too. They are probably some of the most colorful animals you'll see out there. One of them at least, one of the amphibious reptilian varieties. And a lot of times they are actually fairly dangerous creatures if not handled well, because you can go just fine and see a lot of interesting frogs. They're not dangerous creatures because they're sharp teeth or they sneak attack their enemies, but rather they're dangerous simply because there's a good bunch of them that just carry a bunch of goop on them or things on them. Frogs are poisonous sometimes, but they have a large variety of poisonous frogs. And a good way to know is that if it has a lot of colors, it could be dangerous. Not every frog that's colorful is dangerous, but what I've learned from my experience is that the brighter the colors, bright means stay away. Good example, a poison dart frog, not shown at this expose, but they are very, very poisonous creatures. Skin contact can be incredibly dangerous. I don't know if you'll necessarily die from it, but you can get very sick from it. And it's very dangerous, and a lot of predators like, bigger fish or birds know to stay away from these creatures, because if they have like piercing blue, bright purples and stuff on them, they know to stay away because they will get sick and die. It's really fascinating. So definitely if you see a really, really bright frog, best not to pick it up. And, oh man, chameleons. I forget how cool these things can be sometimes. Their hands are really interesting, a chameleon. So, chameleons, for your refresher, they're those creatures. They're lizards, but they have those really funky eyes that look in multiple directions. If you ever saw the Nickelodeon movie Rango, starring actors, then you'd probably remember the main character was a chameleon with really funky eyes. And, well, that's pretty true to form. These these boogers with the very unique peepers, these guys have something really cool about them too. They do have tongues that just shoot out, I think, at least half their body length, or maybe it's double their body length. I don't remember. It's one of those, and it's really crazy either way. But they also have something really cool, is their hands. Their hands are like claws. But not like, slicing claws, but rather one of those little toy claws that you use that makes a really loud crack noise. And if you want to know what chameleon hands are like, take your hand right now and make a big C with it. So you have your thumb, and then all your fingers are kind of cupped together and make a big C, and you have yourself a chameleon's claw. And it's really cool to get to watch them move around, because they're not like most lizards or frogs. They have suction cups, or they have little claws, or rather they have these circular C cups, claws that just kind of grab onto things, and it's really fascinating to watch. Along with lizards, since we're on the topic, iguanas. Iguanas are actually relatively dangerous. They're pretty powerful for their size. If they were bigger, they could probably be equated somewhat to like alligators or crocodiles, but their tail is genuinely powerful, and if they were startled enough, they could whip a person and probably deal a little damage. I wouldn't say like deadly damage, but they actually could, do something to you. But if they were bigger, you'd probably want to watch out for those things. So iguanas are something you should always, be on the watch for, but they're not very dangerous. There are a lot of other types of lizards, and some interesting ones too. Axolotls, they are very, very adorable creatures, but I can't say they make like excellent pets. They're mainly water based. They're definitely very cute, and they've gotten a lot of popularity lately. But they look just like large tadpoles and stuff. They're cute creatures. I can see why people are very hyped about them, but I can't really vouch on how good of a pet they are. And speaking of interesting pets, crabs. Apparently crabs are pretty popular, not only with hermit crabs, but just land crabs. They kind of, when they're not moving, they kind of look like a piece of melted chocolate. Land crabs can look like that. But they also look like, really smooth stones too. They're really interesting creatures. They're really fascinating to watch. But if something has pincers on it, I don't know if I want it to be a pet for me, because I can't really like cuddle it. And I guess I also just kind of fear when I'm not looking, it just decides to pinch me because it's mad. I don't know. That's just me at that point. Also, I got to talk about geckos. Geckos are adorable. They're kind of like if a jaguar and a lizard were mixed together. That's what they look like. They're incredibly harmless for the most part, but also they look really cool. And what I like about geckos is, rather than claws, they have suction cups. So much like frogs, these things have little suction cups on their hands, and they just stick to whatever. I actually think the Geico gecko, I actually think that's a lizard. I have to double check. They keep calling it a gecko, but I actually think it's just a green lizard. So there's a fun fact for you. That little green dude you see in the commercials, I don't think it's a gecko. I think it's actually just a common green lizard. Whereas when you see an actual gecko, they have more, it's weird to say, but they have sort of like more bumps on it. And I don't know how often geckos have the same kind of green pattern as that lizard. So I'm just going to say he's a green lizard for right now. I need to do more research because I feel there is some subterfuge in the works. But it's just definitely something fun to ponder about. Along with that, there are several others, a lot of geckos, snakes. It was mainly snakes, but some of the really cool animals were some of the mammals that I'll definitely talk about, and I'll definitely put in my top 10 or top 5 in the next segment. But for right now, we're actually going to take another break in just a second. And if anyone wants to take a minute to discover, I will probably have to follow up if that guy is a gecko or not. Take a moment while I go look this up myself. But until then, here are some words from our sponsor and from our associates. Please enjoy, and I'll see you in a bit. I got some searching to do.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Facts. Apparently, yes, he is a gecko. Now, what type of gecko is a little more interesting because apparently he's based off of a Felicuma, or genus of the Felicuma, but it also seems to be a bit of a mishmash between other gecko types as well. Which is definitely interesting. So looking at this picture, yeah, it's a pretty common green gecko, just without all the patterns. The eyes are definitely what gives it away. So yes, he is indeed a gecko. But anyway, thank you guys for joining me today. So in this last segment, I want to talk about a lot of the cool animals I saw at this event and just kind of discuss which I thought were really awesome and also some that I thought maybe should be doubles considered before looking into being a pet. So a lot of the cool ones I definitely thought were a lot of the snakes. Now, not being a snake person myself, it was hard for me to say, oh yes, this is definitely the best pet, but I know that there is a large amount of people who do enjoy snakes, and there were a lot of different varieties of snakes, not just your typical boas or constrictors or anacondas or anything, but very simple snakes that were very lovely too. Very nice to look at, and got to really talk to some of the people at this event. Along with that, we also had a lot of the lizards, geckos, all those. I would definitely say maybe some geckos, if you're a person who likes little lizards, but you also do really need to be cautious simply because they can be little squirmies, and you have to keep a close eye on them. But a lot of the lizards were really cool. I personally enjoy lizards. Bearded dragons are very neat pets. I've gotten to hold several, and they're very cool. Chameleons are neat, but they do require a lot of extra attention. But they are neat animals. I wouldn't really say go out of your way to get one, but I definitely think chameleons are very, very interesting animals. Tortoises, if you want a very low-maintenance animal, that's definitely a route you could go. Do keep in mind, though, that tortoises and turtles, they do have a lifespan. They can grow, but at the same time, they are not very action or high-energy pets most of the time. So If this is for your kids, I definitely wouldn't advise getting them unless, just low maintenance pet. Any pet is going to be a investment, and you definitely shouldn't overestimate how simple it'll be to take care of a turtle or tortoise, because they do still require just as much attention as anything else. And lastly, there were some pretty cool frogs. Frogs were pretty neat. I think frogs are pretty cool, frogs and toads. Would I own one? Probably not. But I do think that they're really cool. Getting to look at them, getting to see them in action is something. It's such a treat to get to see those. But some of the other pets that were there, and some of these I would put pets in quotation marks because these kind of border for me. Being someone who worked with animal rehabilitation and knowing what it's like for some of these animals to be displaced is definitely a touchy subject for me, but it still was very interesting to get to see some of these. But tarantulas, interesting pets. I know people who love these things. I'm not a spider guy. I think they're very fascinating. There's a lot to learn about tarantulas, and I'd love to talk about them one day. I'm a big bird fan, and there were a lot of parrots there. Not parakeets, parrots. And parrots can be good pets, but keep in mind that they are a lot of maintenance, and along with that, they can be jerks, or they can be very picky. So if they don't like you, they will let you know that. Some of the other animals there were a lot of very interesting pets. Wharf hamsters, which don't look like your average hamster, but they're very soft and poofy, but they're very small too. A skink. A skink is something that I could talk a lot about, but a skink is very similar to a snake, but also a lizard. They have different varieties of it. Very, very interesting creatures. Different parrots as well. Huge snakes. I mean some really big ones. I would not advise that for your average pet consumer. There was a porcupine. Some of these were more or less display animals or animals that people had with them, but no. Unless you have like a ranch or a lot of space, porcupines are not ideal pets. As someone who works, again, with animals at a rehabilitation center / environmental conservation, I would not advise porcupines being a pet. It requires a lot of maintenance and attention, and we as people who were taking care of animals would not advise this because they do require some extra attention. Some other animals as well. Bunnies. Bunnies are pretty common pets, but when you start getting into really large bunnies, they're not really expected to have the longest lifespan. In captivity they can, but it's also not always super healthy for them to get this big either. There were some wild dogs and even a wolf. These were domesticated, and they're not animals I highly advise to make into pets. Sure, they are dogs and semi-domesticated, but bigger dogs, specifically that are still categorized as wild dogs, are not the safest thing to have. Because a lot of their instincts are still pretty in there, and it's more or less for their sake rather than yours. And also something that I was very surprised to see, they had some kangaroos. Now these more than likely are not pets to buy there, more or less actual wild animals or animals that have been rehabilitated. If you live in North America and you're trying to get a kangaroo as a pet, you should stop right there. I don't even think in Australia people have these as pets very often. These are animals that require a lot of care and actually are fairly aggressive in adults in maturing ages. So as young roos, they're actually a lot more docile, but as they mature, they can become pretty aggressive and are actually very dangerous. If we had a lot of these in America and some people decided to get drunk, they would not last long. It's not very ideal. A lot of these animals, they're exotic for a reason. They're not familiar to us. And I definitely wouldn't advise some of these animals as pets, but I definitely would say if you get the opportunity to get close enough to one of these animals in a safe environment, definitely take advantage of that. And wildlife events like this are great. Just make sure that, everything's being treated well, because there are people who still, don't always have the best interest. They just want to make a buck. Also, of course, some of these animals are bred, so there is a big debate over adopt, don't shop, don't just get breeded animals. But there are also situations of some animals with dwindling numbers living longer in captivity. But that varies from place to place, person to person, institute to institute. And I would definitely proceed with caution on a lot of these creatures. When it comes to dogs and cats, adopting animals is definitely much more important than just finding someone who's breeding that perfect little schnauzer for you, or that kitten with a really cute orange fur. You can find a lot of these things you're looking for at a shelter, and those creatures need just as much love as any other creature does. Creatures like these that are, quote, more exotic, it's a little not great when people try to breed animals for sale, as opposed to, hey, my animal's had a baby and we can't take care of it, it needs to go, here, please have this baby. But that's, again, neither here nor there, and it is also pretty conditional. But I do highly suggest doing a little more research on it. One day I'll love to have a talk about it as well, so that way you all can be more informed as well about, what some of the best and worst choices about that can be, and about what some of these amazing creatures are like. But there are really amazing creatures out there that a lot of people deserve to take the time to go learn about and really understand how natures are, what is and isn't a pet, and what works best for you. But as we wrap up today and just kind of go over everything, we had an awesome time talking about exotic animals, snakes, lizards, insects, all them creepy crawlies that people freak out when they run across the kitchen floor. But all animals are very unique and interesting, and exotic doesn't just mean that they aren't from here. It means that they have a unique quality to them that we as people don't get to experience every day. And I encourage you to go learn a little bit more about some any chance you get, and I also hope that you decide to keep listening. And once again, I want to say thank you for listening to the GSMC Pets Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to thank you, and please remember to subscribe to the show, write a nice review, it really helps us out, and if you can, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. As always, thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the GSMC Pets Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.